Belonging is the oldest instinct of the human species. Not belonging is the highest price anyone can pay. What happens to a human being who's born without the invisible magnetism that connects everyone else? The answer to that question might lie in 40 years of psychiatric practice. Dr. Rami Kaminsky treated thousands of patients in New York. Brilliant, articulate, socially skilled people who carried a kind of suffering that no diagnosis could explain. They could navigate any environment with enviable ability. But they paid an invisible price for every interaction. An exhaustion that accumulated until it became unbearable. He called these people outliers. And maybe you're one of them. Let me show you an image that's going to change how you see yourself. Imagine a large circle. This circle represents the collective consensus where most people live. It's where trends are born, where everyone wants to be seen, where belonging happens naturally. The extrovert wants the center, wants to be the protagonist, the name everyone remembers. The introvert stays at the edge, participates, but keeps their distance. And the outlier, where are they in this picture? The outlier is inside the circle, knows the rules, knows how to play the social game better than most people. But there's a fundamental difference. While everyone looks toward the center seeking validation, the outlier's gaze points in the opposite direction. They see something out there that others can't see. A world of their own. A reality that exists only for them. This isn't a defect, it's a configuration. Maybe you've already felt this. You show up at a company party, greet everyone, ask the right questions, ask about vacations, kids, the show everyone's talking about, laugh at the right moment, agree when you need to. On the outside, everything's perfect. On the inside, you're counting the minutes until you can leave. It's not laziness. It's not being difficult. It's not a lack of social skills. It's that your brain works in a fundamentally different way than most people around you. And no one ever explained this to you clearly before. When you finally get home after one of those mandatory social interactions, it feels like you ran a marathon carrying weight on your back the entire time. Your whole body begs for absolute silence. Your mind pleads for a moment without having to decode other people's facial expressions. Now, without calculating what others expect from you every second, without performing a role that was never genuinely yours. And the worst part? Nobody around you understands what you're feeling, because on the outside, you look completely normal. Actually, you look even better than normal. You look like someone who dominates any social environment with impressive ease. I know it's hard to hear this, but the problem was never you. The problem is that they gave you an incomplete map since childhood and expected you to find a path that simply doesn't exist on the map they handed you. Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychiatrist and thinker, created the terms introvert and extrovert back in 1921 when he published his work on psychological types. But he never wanted these concepts to become rigid boxes to shove complex human beings into. He talked about psychic energy, about flow, about something dynamic that changes according to the moment in life, according to the specific situation, according to the circumstances the person faces. It was the self-help industry that turned everything into magazine quizzes in the following decades, into 15-minute tests that promise to reveal who you really are, into a fixed label you carry for the rest of your life as if it were a definitive sentence. And millions of people around the world were left without words to explain what they truly feel about themselves. Left trapped between categories that don't fully describe them. If you don't fit comfortably into either of the two profiles that popular culture offers, the natural conclusion you reach is that there's something fundamentally wrong with you. That you're an introvert pretending to be an extrovert due to constant social pressure. Or a blocked extrovert who just needs to loosen up more, force more interactions, go out more until everything becomes natural. But there's a third possibility that almost nobody mentions. And that's what we need to talk about now with full attention. Kaminsky treated thousands and thousands of people over 4 entire decades of dedicated clinical work. and a very specific and consistent pattern started to appear in his sessions. Patients would arrive who had absolutely no fear of public speaking or putting themselves out there, who led large teams with recognized competence, who gave brilliant presentations to hundreds of people without any apparent sign of nervousness. But after any social interaction, no matter how small, they felt like they donated blood to the world, like something essential and vital had been drained from them during that seemingly simple socialization process. It wasn't anxiety in the classic sense that the manuals describe. It wasn't conventional depression. It was something much more subtle and much harder to capture with the traditional diagnoses available. The main characteristic he found in absolutely all of these patients was this: a lack of automatic and instinctive sense of belonging to groups. Sounds simple when you hear it like that, but this difference changes absolutely everything about a person's life experience. Most people are born with a type of social magnet built into their brain from day one. They naturally and effortlessly connect to groups, teams, brands, cultural movements, and collective causes. They feel genuine, visceral pride in wearing the jersey of the soccer team they chose to support, in being part of a religious or political community that shares their values, in carrying symbols that connect them to strangers they'll never meet personally, but who are part of the same group. This belonging doesn't need to be built brick by brick. It just happens automatically, like breathing or blinking. For the outlier, this magnet simply doesn't exist. It didn't come in the package. A flag is just colored fabric with interesting geometric patterns. An expensive designer bag is just processed leather and worked metal with skill. A luxury imported car is just a means of transportation with specific technical specifications and good performance. There's no contempt whatsoever for these objects or for the people who value them. There just isn't that automatic, visceral connection that transforms material things into powerful symbols of shared collective identity. And if you feel like you love people deeply, but one at a time, building each relationship from scratch with patience and dedication, brick by brick, without the shortcuts that the social magnet naturally offers others, you're not alone in this experience. A lot of people feel exactly this. You know that elevator small talk that happens every day? The automatic greeting in the hallway at work? The comment about the weather or traffic that only serves to fill uncomfortable silence between two people? There's a technical name for this. It's called phatic language. An anthropologist named Malinowski discovered and named this phenomenon while studying traditional societies. It's speech that doesn't pass absolutely any relevant information from one person to another. The literal content doesn't matter one bit. What matters is what these exchanges signal on a deeper level. I'm not a threat to you. We belong to the same group. We can coexist in peace in this shared space. For most people, this type of social exchange is completely automatic and unconscious. It happens without any noticeable effort. Like blinking, like digesting food. For the outlier, each one of these seemingly simple small exchanges costs conscious energy that needs to be spent. They need to actively process the social expectation behind the speech, mentally formulate the appropriate response for the specific context, execute the social performance with correct timing and intonation so as not to seem weird, and not because they're socially incapable or have some deficit, but because their brain simply wasn't factory programmed for this type of automatic symbolic communication. It's like being forced to write with the wrong hand all day long, every single day of your life, in every interaction you have with other people. Maybe you're thinking this doesn't make sense in your case because you're genuinely good in social situations and people always compliment you on it. But here comes the central paradox that confuses everyone. The outlier often develops social skills much better than the average people around them over the course of their life, precisely because they need to pay conscious attention to what others do automatically. They learn to read facial microexpressions with almost frighteningly detailed precision. They learn to modulate their tone of voice perfectly for each specific context they encounter. They learn to say exactly what each situation requires at the exact moment. From the outside, they look like a natural-born extrovert who was made to shine socially. From the inside, they're a talented actor who can never leave the stage. A constant and exhausting performance that has no intermission or day off. The difference between knowing how to do something very well and genuinely enjoying doing that thing is absolutely vast. And this crucial distinction almost never appears in popular conversations about personality types. The cost of this daily social acting is completely invisible to anyone watching from the outside. The deep exhaustion that arrives at the end of a seemingly normal and calm workday. Not caused by the technical work itself that you performed. Caused by the dozens of mandatory social interactions that accumulated throughout the hours. The urgent need for periods of absolute silence to recharge an internal battery that drains much faster than your colleagues around you. The famous Irish goodbye, when you simply disappear from a social event without saying goodbye to absolutely anyone. Not out of rudeness or lack of consideration, because the internal energy simply ran out and each additional goodbye would cost reserves that no longer exist at that moment. And no one around you notices what's happening. Because you're so good at the role you play that no one even suspects it's a role being performed. Kaminsky explains this whole mechanism through modern neurology. The brain's reward system works in a fundamentally different way in the outlier compared to most of the population. When a typical person receives a genuine public compliment, warm applause at a presentation, clear and unequivocal social validation, their brain releases dopamine in significant amounts. There's a real and measurable chemical pleasure in being approved by the group they belong to. This mechanism evolved over millions of years of human history to keep humans united in cohesive and cooperative groups, to reward behaviors that benefit the tribe and the collective survival of all members. In the outlier's brain, this dopamine response is too weak, or simply doesn't exist in any noticeable way. Public compliments don't generate real pleasure that you can feel in your body. Enthusiastic applause doesn't satisfy in a lasting way. The warm approval of others is registered intellectually. You perfectly understand that you are well received and that this should be good, but you don't feel that pleasurable chemical rush that motivates the constant pursuit of more social approval. The only real and genuine satisfaction comes from within, from meeting an internal standard that you yourself established, from solving a problem that you considered important regardless of what others think about it. This is exactly why motivational phrases like "everyone's doing it," or "it's the big trend right now," or "you don't want to miss out on this wave," simply don't work as effective motivators for you. While these phrases move mountains for most people, your brain automatically asks a completely different question. But does this make genuine sense for me, regardless of what everyone else is doing? If you're like this, you probably always have been, from the earliest moments of your life that you can remember clearly. It's not something that appeared after some specific event. The outlier child doesn't need any specific trauma or negative experience to feel different from the other children around them. They simply are different for as long as they can remember. They prefer to play alone in their own world even when surrounded by available and friendly classmates to interact with. Not due to social rejection or fear. Because their inner world is genuinely more interesting and satisfying than the standardized games that others offer. They talk more easily and deeply with adults about complex topics than they participate in the typical childhood dynamics of their age that seem empty of real meaning. They question established rules that all the other children simply obey without thinking twice. Not out of teenage rebellion or desire for attention. Out of genuine incomprehension of why that should be followed without any questioning. And the parents, with the best of intentions and genuine concern, try to fix what they perceive as a problem in their child. They tell them to socialize more with other children, make more friends their own age, join team sports, be normal like all the other children seem to be naturally. The child quickly learns to pretend, to hide who they really are behind a convincing social mask, to perform with growing competence exactly what's expected of them in every situation. The psychological and emotional price of this forced adaptation shows up years or decades after childhood. In psychologists' and psychiatrists' offices trying to understand what's wrong. In burnout crises that seem to have no logical explanation when external life seems to be going well. In the persistent question that never quiets, why do I feel so chronically tired and empty from being who I'm not, really? Jung talked about a fundamental process that he called individuation, the long and challenging path of becoming who you really are in essence, of gradually separating from the social mask you absorbed since childhood to be accepted, of integrating the parts of your personality that you hid or denied to get approval from others. He said this path is necessarily solitary in its deepest nature, not in the sense of being physically isolated from the world, but of making a fundamental inner journey that absolutely no one can make for you or alongside you. The outlier is already partially separated from the collective mainstream from birth. They don't need to actively differentiate themselves because they were never completely merged with the group in the first place. Their existential challenge is different and perhaps more difficult in certain aspects, finding their own internal center without the external references that guide most people in their life decisions. When others' approval doesn't serve as a reliable compass to guide your important decisions, all that's left is yourself as a guide, your own internal perception as the only available north. This can be deeply liberating for those who learn to use this resource, or completely terrifying for those who never learn to trust themselves. It depends entirely on how much you develop the ability to trust your own perception throughout your life history. But before I continue with what I want to tell you, I need to talk about something important, something that could completely change how you see your own story and your place in the world. Keep this in mind, we'll come back to it shortly. The documented history of humanity is full of people exactly like this, who could clearly see what everyone else couldn't, who consistently looked outside the consensus while everyone else stared fixedly at the social gravitational center seeking approval. Alan Turing couldn't navigate the elaborate social rules full of subtleties of conservative England of his time. He constantly offended people with no conscious intention to offend. He obsessively focused on abstract mathematical and logical problems that absolutely no one else around him found relevant or even interesting. This same apparent inability to belong to the social consensus of his time allowed him to see patterns in complex systems that other brains, too busy with social approval and conformity, could never perceive. He created the theoretical and practical foundations of modern computing that you use today. Steven Spielberg was the perpetually isolated kid with a camera in his hand. He filmed toy trains and imaginary worlds of fantastic disasters in his backyard, while all his same-age classmates played football and did the normal social activities that boys that age do. His apparently problematic loneliness transformed into an unparalleled creative laboratory. The fantastic and exciting universes that he couldn't find in conventional social interactions that didn't make sense to him, he meticulously built on film, frame by frame, scene by scene. Today, billions of people on the entire planet regularly travel through imaginary universes that were born from that original inability to belong to the common social circle. The same neurological characteristic that causes intense suffering in wrong and poorly adapted social contexts generates absolutely unique and valuable contributions when it finds the right environment to flourish and fully express itself. The fundamental question isn't whether being this way is objectively good or bad as a human characteristic. The real and practical question is whether you're trying to live an entire life that was designed and optimized for a completely different type of brain than yours. The traditional corporate work environment tends to be particularly difficult and draining for this specific profile. Endless meetings that exist primarily to signal presence and commitment, not to solve real problems or make important decisions. A forced and artificial group dynamics where demonstrating visible collaboration matters much more than the final result of the work delivered. Collective logic where knowing how to navigate political relationships and invisible hierarchies is worth much more for promotions than demonstrable real technical competence. For those whose social magnet isn't working, Each workday in this type of organizational structure represents a silent but constant and cumulative wear against their own internal nature. Kaminsky observed very clear and consistent clinical patterns in outlier patients who worked in traditional corporate environments for years on end. Chronic exhaustion that didn't respond adequately to conventional treatments of rest or vacation. Diffuse and persistent anxiety without any apparent reason or identifiable specific trigger. And the corrosive and constant feeling of being in the wrong place in life, doing the wrong thing with their time, even when absolutely all the external indicators of professional success showed enviable achievements and an ascending career. He observed over the years that certain professional configurations work significantly better for this specific type of person. Freelance or self-employed work offers rigorous control over who enters your professional space, and when that happens, allowing calibrated doses of interaction. The position of high-level technical specialist creates a natural protective bubble against generic social demands of the environment, because your specific and irreplaceable competence speaks much louder than any political skill. And paradoxically, in the executive leadership position allows you to define the organizational rules of the game instead of being eternally forced to play by rules that others defined without considering people like you. There's a persistent and harmful cultural myth that people like this are emotionally cold and calculating, fundamentally disconnected from common humanity and its needs. Popular culture loves to show the lonely, misunderstood genius as someone always on the verge of something dangerous or antisocial. Kaminsky argues exactly the opposite based on decades of direct clinical observation. The outlier often possesses the purest and most genuine form of empathy available precisely because they don't automatically assume that all other people function exactly as they function internally. They need to actively ask. I'd investigate with genuine curiosity. Truly try to understand the unique perspective of the other human being in front of them. Common majority empathy works primarily through automatic projection. You see someone visibly suffering and automatically imagine how you would feel in that same situation, projecting your own emotional experience onto the other. This works reasonably well when the other person is fundamentally similar to you in background and life experiences. It works progressively less well when life experiences and internal configurations diverge significantly between you two. The outlier sees the other's pain through the other's filter, not through their own filter automatically applied without reflection. This special capacity for non-projective empathy is genuinely rare in the world and extremely valuable in therapeutic, creative, leadership, and complex conflict resolution contexts. A practical recommendation that Kaminsky consistently makes to his outlier patients might seem strange or out of place for a discussion about psychology and deep self-knowledge. He says clearly, build financial independence systematically and deliberately over time, not as a final life goal or measure of personal success, as an essential and pragmatic tool for psychological survival in the world. For those whose social magnet isn't naturally working, saved and invested money represents the concrete and real freedom to say, then I'm out of this situation, when any context starts to systematically hurt their internal nature. It represents not needing to indefinitely perform a false persona just to be able to pay the month's bills and survive economically. If you're enjoying this content, check the first comment for our exclusive ebook, Alchemy and Archetypes. The practical implication of this recommendation is to systematically cut from your life expenses that only exist for social signaling that you genuinely don't process internally in a pleasurable way. The expensive and ostentatious event organized just to impress distant relatives you see once a year. The unnecessary luxury item that primarily serves to communicate status to strangers in traffic or on the street. The conspicuous consumption that tells the world, I belong to this specific successful group. If you genuinely don't feel the social magnet operating inside you, these expenses simply don't make any sense as legitimate emotional investments. They're valuable financial resources being thrown at a reward system that your brain literally doesn't process the same way as others. Consciously redirect this money to build real and lasting autonomy in your life. to hobbies and personal projects that genuinely nourish your specific soul and give you true pleasure, to gradually build the particular life that makes deep sense to you, completely independent of what makes sense to most people around you. Kaminsky closes his explanations about this phenomenon with a metaphorical image that elegantly summarizes everything that came before in the conversation. You're not a violinist in a conventional symphony orchestra. The orchestra violinist needs to faithfully follow the conductor in every measure of the score, perfectly synchronize with all the other musicians seated around them, completely subordinate their individual expression to the collective whole of the piece being performed. There's genuine and undeniable beauty in this type of collaborative and harmonious music. But it's not your specific beauty. It's not where your particular talent can express itself in the best possible way. You're a solo pianist. Your music doesn't need to follow the rhythm established by absolutely anyone but yourself. Your unique and complete instrument already contains all the voices necessary for an entire and satisfying performance. Play your own music with total and unwavering conviction. At the beginning of this journey, the sound might seem too lonely to bear. The concert hall might seem excessively empty and silent. But eventually, with persistence, someone will hear those unique notes that only you can play that way. Someone will recognize that specific melody as something they always wanted to hear their whole life but never knew existed until they found you playing. And they'll say with genuine admiration, "I wish I could play like that too, in my own unique way." People like this represent somewhere between 10 and 15% of the total human population on the planet. They're not a statistical majority by any means, but they're also not a system error or an anomaly to be corrected. They make perfect evolutionary sense as part of human diversity. They're the collective safety mechanism that can question the direction when absolutely everyone runs together in the same direction without thinking. If you made it this far in this video and recognized yourself in every description presented, in every example discussed, you need to understand something fundamental about your own existence. You're not broken in any way. You don't need urgent repair. You're not a defective version of a normal person who needs to be fixed to function properly in the world. What you genuinely need is to stop trying to live an entire life that was designed and optimized for a completely different type of mind than yours. You need to consciously build a personal and professional environment that respects your specific configuration instead of violating it daily. You need to accept with peace that automatic connection with groups simply isn't going to happen for you the way it naturally happens for others, and that this isn't a personal tragedy or a deficiency to be overcome. It's simply your particular way of existing in the world. The characteristic solitude of the outlier isn't the bitter and painful solitude of someone who is rejected and desperately wants to belong but simply can't no matter how hard they try. It's the productive and creative solitude of someone who sees differently, of someone who processes the world through a rare filter that few share. This particular solitude can transform into a solid foundation instead of a suffocating prison. It can be the silent space where your unique music finally emerges, where your singular contribution to the world gradually takes shape, where you finally rest from infinitely pretending to be what you never really were. There's no cure because there's no disease to be cured whatsoever. There's just you, whole and complete in your specific way, consistently looking outward while everyone around stares fixedly at the center. And there's a fundamental question that absolutely no one can answer for you. What exactly do you see out there that others simply can't see? If this video made deep sense to you, leave your like to support the channel, subscribe if you're not subscribed yet, and hit the bell so you don't miss the upcoming content we prepare every week. And if you genuinely want to go deeper on this journey of real self-knowledge, check out our membership club, where we dive deeper into these topics every week with exclusive content that doesn't appear on the public channel.